Hello Miracle Fighters and welcome back to yet another Cardfight Vanguard V Premium deck profile. This time I'll be showing off my Megacolony Gredora deck, which focuses on the Cradle mechanic. So Gredora has been out for a while now, and even though Megacolony has gotten new bosses in the V Clan collection, none have really been able to replace the Insect Queen herself. This deck has strong control, multi-attacks, and an interesting plus engine / tutor ability through the Cradle marker mechanic that makes this deck able to react to many different situations. Without further ado, let's get right into the deck. So we start off first with the starter. Okay, you can play any starter you want. I'm using Youthful Mutant Directors because Machining Worker Ant has been our starter in V for so long, and I'd rather reserve it for the Machining deck. But this deck Directors fits better. And for our main boss, we start off first with the 4 copies of Evil Governor Darkface Gredora. So let's have a look at her ability. So she has 2 abilities. The first is activated once per turn. Counterblast 1 and choose up to 2 of your opponent's rearguards without any cradle markers and put a cradle marker on each of them. To put it simply, what a cradle marker does is that it reduces your opponent's power by its original power, so it reduces it to 0, and the cradled unit loses all boost and intercept abilities as well as return abilities. So it will only keep its name, it will keep its grade, it will keep its critical if it matters, it will also keep its clan as well as the race. So in a way it's similar to a delete from Link Joker, except that this time it's only for your rearguards. The cool part about the cradle markers is that when the unit with the cradle marker is retired, be it through an effect, through an attack, or if the opponent calls over it to replace it, you can search your deck for up to 1 card with the same grade as the cradle unit and add it into your hand. So if you cradle a grade 2, you can, and you retire, and your opponent retires that grade 2 cradle unit, you can search your deck for a grade 2. Now if it's a grade 1, you search for grade 1. Essentially, depending on what grade units that your opponent has on the field, with this deck and with the cradle marker mechanic, you can cradle and basically tutor any card straight from the deck. It's this ability of the cradle marker that makes the Gredora deck a very versatile deck with answers to a lot of situations, and this also allows us and gives us room to play single tag cards and whatnot that may be good in certain situations. So now with the cradle mechanic out of the way, let's have a look at the second ability of Darkface Gredora. On attack, you can retire 1 rearguard, search your deck for up to 1 grade 3 card and superior call it to rearguard circle. The called unit and Gredora gets plus 10,000 power until the end of turn. Now this is a really strong ability that enables multi-attacking in Megacolony, which has never really been known for its multi-attacking. So Gredora being able to call out any grade 3 from the deck also means that you can play a variety of grade 3s, each fitting multiple situations, for you to once again tutor out depending on what best fits the current game state. By giving the called unit and herself plus 10k, your attacks also become rather hard to guard. So yep, that's the boss card of the deck. Really strong. She herself carries the deck a lot, so we want to be running 4 copies of her. Besides Gredora, we are running a variety of grade 3s. So Megacolony has pretty decent grade 3 options, mainly because in V, we became the grade 3 clan, with the other one being Dimension Police, right? Which also got a lot of grade 3 centric cards. But for Megacolony, we do get quite a good amount of good rearguard based grade 3s, so they actually work pretty well with Gredora. So first up, we start off with 3 copies of the Intimidating Mutant Darkface. So Gredora's number 1 soldier. Okay, so let's have a look at Darkface himself. On place on Vanguard and rearguard circle, you can discard a card from a hand, choose one of your opponent's rearguards without any cradle markers, and put a cradle marker on it. Basically, cradle one of your opponent's rearguards for a discard. The discard is not really a minus because with the cradle you can plus back, so that's fine. And then the second ability of Darkface is on attack on Vanguard rearguard circle, counterblast 1, choose one of your opponent's rearguards with a cradle marker, and you can retire it. Darkface gets 5k power for each grade of the retired unit, meaning that if you cradle something of high grade like 2 or 3, it can hit for 22k to 27k, which is pretty decent. Retiring a cradle unit also immediately sets off the cradle marker ability. Right, as I've mentioned just now, The Cradle marker does not care how the unit is retired, just cares that it is retired, be it through an ability or whatnot. So this is an ability that retires that unit. So what this does is that it forcefully activates the Cradle marker, preventing your opponent from any counterplay, and also allowing you to deck thin mid-battle phase so that you can check more triggers. Certain decks may have ways to nullify the effects of Cradle markers by moving rearguards with Cradle markers to solve for their cost of their unit's abilities, or by bouncing cards back to their hand, etc. So sometimes being able to just straight up retire the Cradle marker before the opponent gets a chance to do anything with the unit with the Cradle marker can be really handy. So that's why we're running 3 copies of Darkface. Next up, we also have 2 copies of the Pincer Attack Mutant Intrude Scissors. This card is a clan collection card or clan selection card, and is really now one of Megacolony's best grade 3s. So 2 abilities. The first is, if it's in a drop zone, at the end of the battle that your grade 3 or greater Vanguard attacked, if your opponent took a new damage this turn, counterblast 1, superior call this card from the drop zone. Then the second ability is on place on rearguard circle, so blast 1, choose one of your rearguards, stand it, and Intrude Scissors gets plus 10,000 power until the end of turn. Now this is one of the key pieces in the Gredora 5 attack combo, which is your winning combo and basically what you aim to do every single turn. Intrude Scissors is probably the best attack extender in this deck, barring Gredora's second ability. The first ability can be used very easily in the early game when the opponent is at low damage, because as long as your opponent says no guard for any of attack before your Vanguard's attack, you can activate this ability. This also makes your opponent think twice about not guarding for your first few attacks to try to get damage triggers, so it can be really annoying. And then the on-place effect, the second ability of the Intrude Scissors, is also not from hand, right? It didn't specify where it should be from, so he can actually proc his own on-place effect when placed from the drop, or when placed from the deck through Gredora's ability. Depending on your opponent's Vanguard's power and whether a booster or another attack is better, you can either use Intrude Scissors to re-stand your booster so that you can hit for higher numbers and hit for hit above defensive triggers, or you could also stand an attacker in the front row to give you another attack. So this is how the 5 attack combo would normally go. So you can maybe have a few like this, maybe you can have more boosters here. I just didn't put them for simplicity's sake. So what you can do is, first attack, you can attack with this card. Use the other rearguard to attack. And remember Darkface's effect, you can actually use it to counterblast 1. Retire something, get some power. And now your Vanguard can attack. Skill, retire 1 rearguard. Search your deck for grade 3. In this case, we are gonna get out our Intrude Scissors. Cut a deck, whatever. Intrude Scissors skill, on place, Soul Blast 1. You can stand one of your rearguards, you can stand a booster or whatnot. In this case, I'm just gonna stand this and then give itself plus 10k. On top of that, Gredora also gave it plus 10, so this card here is 32k attack. Then your Vanguard will attack, twin drive, nothing, no triggers whatsoever, doesn't matter. Then you can go 4th attack, and then use Darkface again, and then 5th attack. And the numbers are actually all pretty decent. So yeah, most of the time Intrude Scissors is what you'll be calling out with Gredora. And with Gredora's ability to search out any grade 3 from a deck, you don't really need to run that many copies of Intrude Scissors. 2 has been working fine for me because we do have ways to recycle this card back into the deck that I will talk about when we reach the grade 2s and 1s. So yeah, Intrude Scissors is very important in this deck for the 5 attack combo as I've mentioned, and just like Darkface, it also hits for decently sized numbers, especially against 12k base Vanguards. Another card that works similarly to Intrude Scissors is the Strong Toxin Mutant Demise, way back from the first Megacolony set in V. So we are playing 2 copies of it as well. This card has great synergy with Gredora, all because of this one ability. On place on rearguard circle, you may stand one of your rearguards and rest one of your opponent's rearguards. You don't really care about the resting, but the standing part, that's the very important thing. This guy basically can stand one of your rearguards mid-battle phase for no cost. Demise acts as a backup to Intrude Scissors if you run out of Intrude Scissors, or if you don't have enough soul for Intrude Scissors to restand your rearguard, because this guy, as I've mentioned, is costless. Hell Demise also has a second ability to prevent all of your opponent's rearguards in the back row of the same column as itself to stand, which, if you plan your columns correctly, can also make for a very annoying ability. Sometimes we may not be able to cradle everything, so having Hell Demise as a paralysis card to mess up the opponent's field can be very fun as well. Now, even though Hell Demise doesn't get power like Intrude Scissors, it's still fine because Gredora still grants the superior card unit, in this case Hell Demise, plus 10,000 power as well. So most of the time, Hell Demise will still be able to hit over defensives. While we usually use the restand ability of Hell Demise and Intrude Scissors mid-battle phase to create one more attack, Megacolony does have some, effects that force you to rest one of your rearguards for a cost. So having these abilities can also help you in the main phase. So that's Hell Demise. And then for our last grade 3, I'm running an attack card, and that is the Finisher of Swords, Death Warden, and Lion. So once again, another very old Megacolony grade 3 card, but it gets its job done in this deck. When it attacks, Soul Blast 1 grade 3 and discard 2 cards from your hand. Until the end of the battle, Lion gets plus 10,000 power and plus 1 critical, and your opponent cannot call Sentinels from hand to Guardian Circle. Lion isn't really the main win con of the deck. Intrude Scissors with the 5 attack combo is, but Lion is still a nice option to have, especially in this deck where you can fish up any grade 3 you need with Gredora. If a guard restrict will help you win, by all means get this card straight out from the deck. 22k isn't that scary, but remember Gredora gives the superior card grade 3 an additional 10k, so Death Warden can potentially hit for 32k double crit with a Sentinel Restrict. And I don't know, the additional 10k buff may potentially win you the game. If not, Lion also works well with the other grade 3s, in that you can potentially have 2 Sentinel Restrict attacks in a turn if you restand Lion with either Intrude Scissors or Hell Demise. While Lion does require a couple of grade 3s in Soul, it's actually not too difficult to get the grade 3s into Soul because of certain grade 1s that we run in this deck. So this slot that I'm running Lion in is basically a flex slot. You could run just about anything here, but I personally like a guard restrict unit that I could pull out anytime that I want. So in this deck, your guard restrict will be used very effectively because when you decide to pull Lion out is when you know you're going to be winning with Lion. And yeah, I feel like a tutorable guard restrict is pretty decent. So that's why I'm playing the one-off Death Warden Lion. You never know when a guard restrict will potentially win you the game. With that, that's basically it for all the grade 3s. So 12 grade 3s, I don't think is too much, especially in this grade 3 centric deck. So yeah, let's move on to our grade 2s. Now this deck doesn't really run a lot of grade 2s, mainly because the grade 3s are your main attackers. You only really use the grade 2s for riding or for thinning your deck through the cradle marker. Because if you cradle a grade 2, you obviously can only search for grade 2s in your deck. So we'll start off first with 4 copies of the Intimidating Mutant Sticky Bolas. I currently don't own any of them, but I'll be getting them very soon, like in a couple of days, because I feel like they're possibly the most important grade 2 in the Gredora deck. So let's have a look at Sticky Bolas' effect. The first effect is on place, counterblast 1, search your top 6 cards of the deck from the 2 differently named Darkface units, reveal them and add them to your hand and shuffle your deck. Sticky Bolas is basically the Gredora searcher for the deck to make sure you ride into Gredora. As a plus, if you also find Darkface, you can also add it into your hand to give you a potential +2. Second ability, Soul Blast 1. When she attacks, she gets 6,000 power for each cradled unit on the opponent's field. If her power reaches above 20,000, which means if she gets a minimum of plus 12k, you get a draw. Now this is a very good effect that allows you to hit numbers and increase your hand size. If you restand Bolas with your grade 3s like Intrude Scissors and Hell Demise, you can even use Sticky Bolas' second effect twice in a turn to give you 2 draws and a 20k over attack unboosted. It's kinda soul heavy, but it's doable in this deck, and the additional hand advantage can really help you in the long run. Since Gredora herself cradles 2 rearguards at once with 1 counterblast, Sticky Bolas can actually get the plus 12k pretty easily as long as your opponent calls 2 rearguards to the field, obviously. So Sticky Bolus is the best grade 2 attacker in this deck, and also the best ride in ensuring that you'll get your grade 3 Gredora smoothly. As for our remaining grade 2s, they are our grade 2 Cradlers. I run 2 copies of the Melody Mutant Nympha and 2 copies of Vulgar Mutant Stamping Red. Now this guy is a promo card currently, but it will be reprinted as a triple rare card in the upcoming V Clan collection for Megacolony. So soon everyone will have access to this guy, right? But for now it's a promo card. I'm playing it at 2, but let's have a look at Melody Mutant Nympha first. Nympha has 2 effects. The first is a continuous on Vanguard rearguard circle. If your opponent has a rearguard with a cradle marker, she gets plus 6,000 power. So 15k attacker unboosted, pretty decent. Second ability, when retired from rearguard by your card's ability, Soul Blast 1, choose one of your opponent's rearguards without any cradle markers and cradle it. Essentially it's Soul Blast 1 to cradle any unit, but this effect only activates when she's retired by Gredora in this deck, because Gredora is the only card in this deck that can retire your rearguards. So with this effect, she's the best retire target to use with Gredora, and that makes her a good first attacker before you start multi-attacking. So you can just use her 15k unboosted, and if your Vanguard attacks, retire her, get out something else. Not too bad. And you also get a Cradle as well. And then for Stamping Red is similar. The first effect is different, but the second effect is basically the same as Nympha. During your turn, if your opponent has a cradled rearguard, it gets plus 6k. So once again, 15k attacker. So all of the grade 2s can actually hit unboosted, which is very nice. And then the first effect of Stamping Red, Counterblast 1, when placed on Vanguard or rearguard circle, you can cradle one of your opponent's rearguards. If you did not cradle any, you draw a card. So this is a really good effect because it means you can start cradling as early as turn 2. Previously, Cradle used to be reserved till turn 3, besides a particular grade 1 card. So in the early game, your opponent could just use cards with good effects before you nullify their abilities. For example, cards like Skull Witch Nevin and Varian's Killer Tail, right? They can just use it for 2 turns straight without you being able to cradle them. But with Stamping Red, now on turn 2 you can just start cradling your opponent's important rearguards already. So nothing is really safe against this deck anymore with this card. And if you don't cradle, the draw is also a nice +1 to your hand, which is great because instant plussing is always nice. And this deck doesn't really play that many draw triggers, so we get any plussing that we can possibly get. A cradle and a draw one is pretty much the same, except that the cradle is targeted, but a draw is random. But either ways, you're adding cards into your hand, so I don't see why that is bad. So yeah, Stamping Red. And that's basically it for the grade 2s. So only 8 of them, but I think that it's honestly enough. Most of the time, Sticky Bolus is the only one that I use the effect of because it's just too good. And the rest of them are just there to prevent myself from misgrading. Right? You can play any other grade 2 you want. You can play Machining Mantis for more grade 3 searching. You could play some counter charges like Bloody Hercules, which can also give power to your units until the end of turn, which works well with the Restanders. Right, you could play Hiding Killer Leaf for the mill and the potential draw. There are a lot of options, but currently I'm just playing this 4. You could even play the Giraffa grade 2. I think the Giraffa grade 2 is also a nice option as well. If you just care about the draw, then it sort of functions similar to Stamping Red. But I prefer Stamping Red because of the cradle potential, right? So those are nice grade 2 options, but for now, these 3 types work well for me. Now let's move on to the grade 1s. So the grade 1s are very important in this deck because Megacolony has quite a good number of good grade 1s. We start off first with 3 copies of Mutant Gentleman High Class Moth. This card is regarded as a grade 3 in both deck and your soul, which makes it a pseudo grade 3 of sorts that synergizes greatly with Gredora. Firstly, being a grade 3 means it can be searched out directly through Gredora's effect to superior quality grade 3 from the deck, meaning that if you sort of desperately need a high class Moth, you can just pull this card straight out from the deck with Gredora's effect. And being a grade 3 in Soul also means that if you ride into this card, you can actually use Death Warden Antlion as early as turn 3, which can really push for damage if your opponent does not have a ton of shield values ready at hand. Do note that because it's regarded as a grade 3 in deck, if you create out a grade 1 and have to search your deck for a grade 1 card, you cannot search for high class Moth, at least from what I understand from this effect. High class Moth's main use in this deck is not for the first effect though, it's actually for the second effect, the activated on rearguard circle effect. Rest this unit for the cost and put a normal unit from a drop zone on the bottom of your deck. Countercharge 1, choose one of your opponent's rearguards and it cannot intercept until the end of turn. This ability is a hard once per turn, so it can only be used by one. You can only use one of this ability per turn. Now the counter charge is basically free, since returning a normal unit to the bottom of the deck is not really a cost, and resting it is no big deal because you can always just put this card behind the Vanguard, and the Vanguard will always be able to hit for 22k. So this is definitely one of the best counter charges in the game so far, because it's also not on place, it's activated, meaning that if your opponent doesn't remove it, then it will remain on the field, and you can get like, you know, free counter charge every single turn. Right, so remember Gredora's Cradle is counter blast 1. With this card on the field, every single turn, Gredora can basically cradle 2 units for free. Not just that, putting a normal unit from drop to bottom of the deck also helps to return key pieces, especially your important grade 3s like Intrude, Scissors and Demise, which you want to be continuously superior calling out with Gredora's effect for the 5 attack combo that I showed previously. With high class Moth, you will never run out of core targets for Gredora, and you can also sort of prevent deck out in longer games. All in all, high class Moth is definitely a must play. I'm only playing 3 copies because it's tutorable and it's hard once per turn, so you can't really spam it as well. Too many copies will also mean that additional copies are dead. You just really only need 1 per turn. So 3 is a nice number. For more counter charge options, I'm also running 3 copies of the small Captain Butterfly Officer. A very old Megacolony card, but a very useful one. So on place, rest this unit, choose up to one of your other rearguards and it gets plus 10,000 power. If you chose at the end of that turn, put that unit into your soul and you get a counter charge. Unlike high class Moth, it's not a main phase counter charge, so it's a more delayed counter charge, but it's still a counter charge nonetheless. And since this deck can also restand your rearguards through the effect of Intrude, Scissors and Demise, if you happen to call Intrude, Scissors and Demise in your main phase after you've used, you know, Butterfly Officer or high class Moth's effect, you will get to use them as actual boosters as well, because you can target them for the restand, which I think is really neat. 6k base is not too bad because boosting your grade 3s, you'll be hitting for 18 minimum, which is still magic number. And then high class Moth can always just boost your 15k grade 2s for magic number against most Vanguards, or all Vanguards. Now back to the topic of restanding your own rearguards. Butterfly Officer giving your unit plus 10,000 power until the end of turn also means that you can get to use the 10k power buff twice, because you could always just give something in the front row plus 10k and then attack with it, mid battle phase, super call out one of your restand that unit and attack with its buffed power as well. So I think that's actually some really nice synergy right there. And if you're worrying about losing rearguards every single turn if you use this card, remember that Gredora retires your rearguards as part of its cost to call more from the deck. What you can do is to retire the unit that you buffed with Butterfly using Gredora's effect as cost, so that in the end you don't end up losing any rearguards. So let's say, for example, you have now Nympha in the front row, you rest Butterfly Officer, you call Butterfly Officer, you rest it, give now Nympha plus 10k, and at the end of the turn you have to retire it. But if you use Gredora to retire now Nympha for Gredora's effect to superior call a card from the deck, then in the end you don't really lose out that many rearguards. In the end you're not really losing any rearguards in fact, right? And you still get the counter charge. So yeah, Butterfly Officer I think works really well in this deck. Alternatively, Butterfly Officer is also a way for you to get extra soul because this deck can get a bit soul heavy at times with quite a number of cards using soul, like Sticky Bolas, Intrude Scissors, Nympha, stuff like that. So yeah, Butterfly Officer can help you generate soul and can help you put your grade 3s into soul for Endlion's effect as well. The rest of the grade 1s are all 2-offs. We can afford to do that because of the Cradle mechanic being a toolbox style mechanic that allows us to fetch individual text straight from the deck. So I'm not afraid of playing 2-offs in this deck. So for Cradle specific support, I'm running 2 copies of Cleared Breeze and 2 copies of the Disturbance Mutant Mossy Roro. We'll have a look at Cleared Breeze first, which recently got reprinted in the Giraffa set. So on place on Vanguard rearguard, discard a card from a hand for the cost to draw a card. And if you discard a grade 3 for this cost, choose one of your opponent's rearguards without any cradle markers and cradle it. This is amazing because it's a free filter plus potentially free cradle, and being a grade 1 also means that you can even cradle as early as turn 1. So with this card, with Stamping Red and with Gredora, every single turn from turn 1 onwards, you can start cradling your opponent's rearguards as well already. For Cleared Breeze, your best discards, if you have any in your hand, will be, I would say Intrude Scissors definitely, right? Or Hell Demise. Intrude Scissors because its effect it can use its effect from the drop zone, and Hell Demise because you can always just return it back into the deck with high class morph. So yeah, Cleared Breeze, really nice card. It's a nice option to have. And then for Disturbance Mutant Mossy Roro, her effect is activated, retire herself, choose one of your opponent's rearguards with a cradle marker, retire it, then call up to 1 card from your deck to rearguard circle with the same grade as the retired unit, and shuffle your deck. Once again, a hard once per turn effect, so you don't really need that many copies of Mossy Roro. But this card's implication is really huge. An example will be you retire a grade 2 unit that is cradled. With Mossy Roro's effect, you will call a grade 2 from your deck to rearguard circle. But because you also retire the cradled unit, you will get to activate the cradle marker effect to set your deck for a grade 2 card and add it into your hand. So this effect, which seems like a 1-for-1 exchange, becomes a 1-for-2 exchange, meaning you're plussing off with Mossy Roro. This is fantastic. So Mossy Roro essentially doubles your cradle markers effect by trading 1 body for 2 cards. Not only are you deck thinning, but you can also fill your field with just this 1 card. Really good, and it's costless as well. It just has to retire itself, which I wouldn't even call a cost. So yeah, definitely this card will help you out in a pinch if you're running low on field size and you top draw this. For the remaining grade 1s, I am playing 2 copies of the Megacolony Grade 3 Searcher, New Face Mutant Little Dorcas. Now this guy, even though he used to be a Darkface support, unfortunately in V Premium and in this deck, it's not really that great. Little Dorcas gets 5k during your turn if your opponent has no standing units. But with the cradle marker preventing boost, if you cradle grade 1 boosters and you don't retire them, they will just remain standing and Dorcas doesn't get the 5k. Still, we run Dorcas not for the plus 5k but for the grade 3 search, which is, grade 3 searchers are just good. Increases the consistency of the deck, ensures that you ride into Gredora, and can also fetch you out a Heal Guardian if you need one in the early game. Lastly, I play 1 copy of the Fouling Net Mutant plus Caesar. Yes, this is a grade 1 PG, grade 1 Sentinel. So, as mentioned before, the cradle marker mechanic means that we can potentially toolbox any card in our deck depending on what we cradle. And if your opponents call grade 1s, which is very likely, and you cradle a grade 1, which is very likely, you have the option to actually fetch a grade 1 PG straight to hand. This is very valuable because, a searchable PG is always good. We've seen how strong it is with, Conroe, stuff like that, and similar starters. And this just gives you more survivability with this deck against, the top decks. 1 PG I feel is honestly enough because High Class Morph is able to return any normal unit from the drop back to the deck. So you can actually return this after you used it once. And this means that, this can become a recurring PG potentially. So yep, this is a very nice tech option, and I think every Gredora deck should tag in one copy at least of a Grade 1 Sentinel. With that, we've basically covered all our main deck units. A lot of different units, but that just gives us more options and more choices. Now let's take a look at our triggers. So in this deck, I'm going for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 crits, 3 draws, and 4 heals. So the heals are your Grade 3 heals, Heal Guardians, Queen Agria. Very important, they're great in this deck. I don't think I need to explain what they do. All of you know what Heal Guardians do already. They're basically really good early defense that also becomes searchable through Dockers and also through Gredora's effect. Now if you happen to cradle Grade 3 rearguards, you even have the option to search for these guys through the cradle marker. I've done it a few times, mainly because this card has 15k shield, and all your other Grade 3s cannot be used for guarding except for this card. So in a pinch, if you really need more shield, sometimes it's better to add this straight from the deck to your hand. You can't always count on a lucky heal, and a lucky heal will not always arrive, but if just a 15k shield will allow you to survive, then just go for it. Being Grade 3s also mean that in the event you will run out of actual normal Grade 3 units to call from the deck, which is very unlikely, but let's say that happens, you have the option to superior call these guys out through Gredora's effect. So Heal Guardians are 10k base, which is not too bad, and if you call them out with Gredora, they become 20k attackers. It's a nice option to have, and options are always good. So yeah, Grade 3 Heal Guardians, fantastic addition to the Gredora deck. Now let's explain the pretty weird ratio here, pretty weird lineup here. 9 crits, 3 draws. So we're playing 8 regular crits and 1 crit sentinel. I don't really have like a solid reason why I'm playing this. It's just I want a bit more crits in this deck for the finishing pressure. And I guess the main reason is that I don't want to be discarding too many of my own cards. So sometimes the 30k shield actually really does help, since I'm using just 1 card to stop an attack. I am still playing the 2 draw PGs as well, because playing more draws will help to stabilize this deck more. Because in the early game, Gredora may take a little slower to set up, so I still feel like that we need a couple of draw triggers. But I also really wanted to fit in the crit sentinel, so this is what you get, right? You have 1 Grade 1 PG already in the main deck, so we can only spread 3 sentinel triggers in our trigger lineup. So I'm going for 2 draws and a crit sentinel. This regular 5k draw can be traded out for another critical trigger. Can be this, meaning that you can play 10 crits and 2 draws. Towards the late game, your cradle markers will be plussing you quite a bit, right? And this deck, because you're superior calling from your deck every single turn, you're also drawing cards through, I don't know, sticky bolas and the cradle markers, right? There's a possibility that you may face deck out. So that's why I didn't really want to play too many draw triggers. I think 2 is actually enough. Currently still running 1 more, just because I'm a bit scared. But I think 2 draws is enough, and 10 crits is the way to go. So generally you will not get to cradle Grade 0s, but in the event that your opponent ends up calling Grade 0s and you cradle them, 30k shield and the sentinel draw are very nice cards that you can pull straight out from the deck to help with guarding. I'm not afraid to pull out triggers from the deck if it helps me to survive one more turn, because triggers are not guaranteed to be checked, but shield values are, and I take a guaranteed guard over a lucky trigger any day. That's basically all for this deck. So for the gifts, do we go for Protect 1 or Protect 2? To be honest, both can work. Because you're multi-attacking, it means that your Protect 2s sort of will get used twice per turn. 1 Protect 2 marker can be used twice per turn. Because you can just multi-attack with the Protect 2 circle. but overall Protect 1 still remains the superior gift. One reason why I really like to play Crit Sentinels in Protect decks is because you get this gift already. This gift is pretty much just a PG, and when you use PG, you'll be discarding cards from your hand, and I don't really like to discard too many cards just to guard, you know, an attack that could be guarded with a massive shield like a 30k shield. So that's why I really like to experiment with 30k shields in Protect decks. But yeah, this deck I usually go for Protect 1 for obvious reasons. But you guys can definitely try Protect 2. The only problem that I have with Protect 2 is that this deck doesn't really run that many grade 2s, as I've mentioned. I'm pretty sure I did. Right, your front row will mostly be clogged up with the grade 3s, so you'll not be able to get the defensive part of Protect 2, the plus 10k shield when intercepting skill off a lot, which really discourages me from using Protect 2, so in the end I always just go for Protect 1. Now this is the full deck list for those of you who prefer looking at entire deck lists. Here we go. Gredora actually has a lot of alternate builds if you guys search up deck builds for her, as you can actually splash any grade 3 boss into the deck and the deck can still function fine. Gardencolio, Giraffa, etc. all can work as secondary bosses to Gredora or vice versa, right? Gredora can be their second bosses as well. Gredora usually is used as a first right to just distribute the cradle markers and control the field a bit before you go into your deck's main win con. Overall, the deck has both defensive and offensive elements. It's defensive because of the cradle mechanic, making your opponent's units weaker while giving you extra cards from deck, and it's also offensive because of Gredora's 5 attack combo that I showed earlier. 5 attacks with 22k or more from turn 3 onwards can be really hard to guard if your opponent does not check defensives or don't have enough heal guardians. Your opponent will need like 2 heal guardians to make your attacks not be able to hit, because Gredora can make herself and the super called unit hit above defensive triggers. I feel Gredora is likely the best Megacolony boss so far in V. Giraffa comes close to beating her, and I've not really tried Master Beater out yet, but for now, this deck's plussing with the cradle markers and the control and the multi-attacks make it the most consistent, and I would dare say strongest Megacolony deck. There are definitely ways for your opponent to play around the cradle mechanic. In fact, certain decks like Grand Blue, Pale Moon, or even Nubatama, which can clear their own field, can prevent you from plussing through the cradle and nullify your cradle mechanic. Certain abilities that your opponent might use to prevent your cradle from activating will be sending cradle units to soul for cost, or bouncing cradle units back to hand, or locking cradle units for cost, which is very likely going to be more common with reverse units returning in upcoming sets. With that said, Cradle is still super good against field-reliant decks, like for example Touch Kaze, where if you cradle a gauged unit like Regiodon or Blue Sprint, your opponent's combo will be gone, right? Your opponent will cry. Force decks generally have a better time dealing with the cradle because their force markers give that cradle unit plus 10k if they choose to put the force marker there, so your attacks are not that weak. But yeah, if you're up against a deck that, you know, does not really care about your cradle mechanic, then you can actually shift your focus to more of a beatdown style playstyle, where you just aim for the 5 attack combo every single turn with Gredora to try to push and I guess just win from there. Just win from having, you know, multi-attacks and high power. With that said, Gredora is fun and it's definitely up there among my favorite decks to play. Of course, while it's fun to pilot for the Megacolony player, for the opponent it's going to be very annoying to deal with. If you're up against a mirror match where you're facing this deck as well, the most important card will be your Butterfly Officer over here, because it can tuck a unit into your soul, which allows you to prevent your opponent from getting the plus through the cradle mechanic. Regardless, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope it gave you guys some insight into the Gredora deck and how I built it. And feel free to try different things for the deck if you guys are also planning to play Gredora yourself. Till then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys. You guys can check out gameplays of this deck in the links in the description down below, or you guys can just scroll through my channel or search for Megacolony Team Miracle 4 and look for the Gredora gameplays.